Hey, pod friends, and welcome to another episode of Pod Friends. That's how it works here. My name is Matt Scott, and I'm the host of Pod Friends, and I'm just so grateful for you. So glad that you're tuning in. And I don't want to take a ton of time before diving into this week's episode featuring this week's guest, Sasha Joseph. And so I'll tell you more about Sasha. I'll tell you more about what to expect. But first of all, how are you doing? How's it going? How's life? I know you might just be coming from another podcast. Feel free to take your shoes off, take your jacket off, settle in, get comfy, grab a cup of water. We're here, we're in together, and I'm excited for you to dive in and join this conversation that I had with Sasha about her life and so much more. But as we dive in, I want to invite everyone, myself included, to ask themselves a simple question, which is, well, maybe not so simple, but how can you live life to the fullest? And how can you live life full size rather than being in somebody's box? You probably know what that's like. Like I know what that's like sometimes when people, family members, friends, coworkers, anyone might have an idea of who you are and who you should be and how you should show up. But the reality is, none of us are as simple as the stereotypes and the things that people think that we should be. Your story, my story, our stories are ours to tell. And this week's guest, Sasha Joseph, is such a powerful example of that. Today, I'm so excited to talk with Sasha in the second to last episode of season 1 of Pod Friends. And, you know, if you know Sasha, you know her from RHAP as a podcast, you know her from post-show recaps, you know her from silent podcasts where she's covered 90 Day Fiancé, Never Have I Ever, Bridgerton, Love and Hip Hop Atlanta, Below Deck, Big Brother, Survivor, all of the shows. She's covered all of it, and Sasha is not afraid to dive into the mess that we might not be brave enough to dive into, frankly. And I really love and admire the way that Sasha kind of shows up and is not afraid to speak up and is not afraid to take up space and live life full size. And that has definitely been something that I've been able to learn from, but also that I know other podcasters and other listeners have been able to learn from. And so I'm so excited for you to dive in and learn more about her journey. In today's interview, in this conversation, I spoke with Sasha about her journey from growing up in Mumbai, India, to moving to the US and living in Oklahoma and Texas. And in a lot of ways, even shattering my stereotypes of what that would be like for someone who moves at a young age from India, really the day before starting high school, I believe. From India to the US to start school in Oklahoma. And Sasha's story is such a powerful one. And I love like the joy that's part of it. I love the strength that's part of it. I love all of the ways that she just manages to shine and be a star. And so you'll hear about that journey. You'll hear about her identity as a Jewish woman of color and her work launching a cohort of badass Black women and other women of color, finding belonging despite differences, which is something that she's encountered, and also just not being in systems that don't serve you, and really finding a place where not only you belong, but also where you're nurtured and where you can thrive. There is so much to Sasha's story and so many different pieces, and I am just thankful that I had the chance to join in and dive in with Sasha to learn about her life and just her as this unstoppable force that we all know and love. But before diving into the mess, like Marie Kondo, like Sasha often does too, um, first of all, if you're hearing the sound of my voice, please, I'll say it one more time. I'll probably say it again at the start of next week's episode, but like leave a review for the podcast and leave 5 stars. I'm so thankful and glad and appreciate everyone who has left reviews. You all listened to me last week. You left some reviews. Maybe I'll read some of those next week. But I'm just so thankful that that I could be here and to hear the feedback from you all, that this is also meaningful for you and this is time well spent, is so great. And so please leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. And you can find the Friends podcast feed by going to robhasawebsite.com/podfriendsfeed, where you're able to find the podcast, you're able to subscribe, you're able to leave those 5 stars, leave a review. And please, it really does go a long way to showing people that this is something that we value, and also goes a long way to making sure that Pod Friends could be a thing that we have in the years to come. Don't be stingy with those 5 stars. And on top of all of that, I just want to encourage folks to follow Pod Friends at Hey Pod Friends. Follow me at Matt Scott GW. Email Pod Friends, podfriends@RHAPhasawebsite.com. Suggest guests for Pod Friends for future Pod Friends. Fingers crossed, future Pod Friends at bit.ly/podfriendsnom. That link will be in the show notes, just like a number of the other links that I mentioned. And also, I want to mention something special. So, today, you're hearing the conversation with Sasha, but actually right now, if you're hearing this when it comes out, you still have a chance, if you are a Rob Has a Podcast patron, to submit questions for my season finale interview, which will be with none other than Wendell Holland, winner of Survivor Ghost Island, and also a community member, someone we know especially well from recent times on the Purple Pants podcast. Bryson Wen presents the events, the Survivor watch parties that he's been hosting for the community. There's so much that Wendell has to share. And if you are an RHAP patron, go to the patron Facebook group. That's Rob Has Awesome Patrons. I believe that's Rob Has Awesome Patrons. Easy for me to say. And, respond to my post, letting me know what questions you have for Wendell. And that's one reason to be a patron, one level of encouragement. But also, when you become an RHP patron, which, if you're listening to this on March 1st, perfect time to become a patron at the start of the month. There are all sorts of games. There are patron benefits. There are lots of community events bringing people together. There's a patron Discord. RHP makes it really easy to watch shows like Big Brother Canada, including Big Brother Canada 10, which is coming up, Australian Survivor. That's really all I want to promote at the start of the show. But without further ado, let me introduce today's guest. Making her way to the podcast, hailing from Oakland, California, by way of Texas, Oklahoma, and Mumbai, India. You've heard her on Silent Podcast, post-show recaps, and on Rob Has a Podcast. Boomer sooner and clear the way for the Bay Area baddie who breaks down the mess and says what we all wish we would. You know her from such places as the Love and Hip Hop Atlanta RHAPup, the new Bridgerton podcast on post-show recaps, and both Never Have I Ever and The Amazing Race over on Silent Podcast. She's booked, busy, and brave, and we love her for it. Oh yeah, please welcome Sasha Joseph. How's your day been?
My day's been good. I'm grateful to be working remote, so I can really create my own schedule and really find liberation in doing my work, because my boss always says this, we do stuff from a place of liberation, not in capitalistic white supremacy habits. So what does it mean, to not feel so pressured all the time and do work out of love? So, it's been a great day. This is a new job. That's why I think I'm so excited for it. But yeah, we're recording at 3 p.m. Pacific time. That's why work is on the mind right now.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on your new job.
Thank you.
But one thing I want to ask about, because I know that we'll get into that. We'll get more into your life and all this. Sasha, everyone knows your brand is mess. I mean, that's what it is.
It's true. It really is.
But you also have a very clean setup. If people aren't watching on YouTube, they should be watching, because Sasha has a nice clean setup, the nice Amazing Race memorabilia, some other pictures and things. But I'm wondering, are you as messy outside the podcast as you are on the podcast? This is one thing that people want to know. This is why the people are tuning in. Maybe over the course of this hour together or so, we'll answer it. But are you truly mess?
Yes, 100%. As in, what you see in the shot is this curated, right? Like Instagram versus reality moment where it's like, oh, look at all this, like, you know, my wedding pictures are in the back, whatever. But around me are like boxes I still haven't unpacked, like bunch of books. I lived in this house, I think, for a year and a half now. And I still have books, like college textbooks that I need to unpack out of boxes. So I'm messy in life when it comes to like physical and
Mhm.
for sure because I love knowing about people's life. Like I'm not one to, you know, be like, "Hey Matt, I heard this about, you know, blank person." Like
Yeah.
I don't like to be messy like that, but I'm Gretchen Wieners where I need to know like
Yeah.
your life. Like I have to know everything about you.
I see it. Your hair
Yeah,
is full
and
of
like I'm pretty
secrets.
shameless with that. Yeah,
Yeah.
like Chappelle, like when Chappelle and I did Never Have I Ever together, and he'll tell you like I have no shame. Like I'll be like, so what's up? What are you doing with your life? And you know, it's just like I'll just ask, and he's like, okay, like we just wrapped an hour long podcast, and I was like, but tell me about your life. So that's the kind of like mess I like to do. But yeah, college me was more messy than 30-year-old me. But you know, we evolve and we mature. Thank
Did you
God.
have like, or do you have like a least favorite chore just while we're talking about mess?
Chores are not fun. No, I think cleaning bathrooms are my least favorite thing
Ugh.
to do. Yeah,
Yeah. Don't even
ratchet.
mention.
I hate it.
Ugh. Yeah. Ugh.
Mhm.
Gosh, what mess. I have to move on. This is
I know
like
it's
just the
horrible.
thought of it. I'm like, ugh. You probably could have said any chore, and I would have been like, ugh, that's disgusting.
Exactly. I am
Ugh.
grateful that I can afford to have very hardworking women come and clean my house once a month. Thank God, because listen, it just when you're living with a partner, I feel like
Yes.
all the time it's like constant. I don't know if anyone out there is living with someone, let me know. But like, how do you make it? You know, because we've been together 6 years, and we like I get on his nerves. Definitely gets on my nerves, and cleaning is the root cause of it all. So when you can
Damn.
outsource, and we're privileged enough to be outsourced, thank God that we can do this.
Wow. Look at that. Look at that. That's some inspiring life advice too, and like
Exactly.
relationship advice to start people off. I don't think people were ready for us to go like that deep already into the advice, but I guess that's what happens when you bring up mess. It just goes deep. And you know,
Exactly.
this is part of what we're trying to do. I'm going deep with you, Sasha, talking with you about life, about your world. And I will say as background, like before I even knew that Pod Friends was actually going to be a thing, I already knew that I wanted to interview you specifically because you were on the Wrestling Wrap Up, and you know, you've obviously like we're both part of the class of 2020, so like you've been around, we've been around places, but when I was getting ready for the Wrestling Wrap Up, the day that we were having you on, me and Mari, I remember, you know, I was like, okay, what am I going to say about Sasha in her intro? And I was like Googling you and looking you up. And I learned so much about you beyond the podcast where I was like, oh my gosh, this is probably not going to come up in the intro, but it could come up in Pod Friends eventually if that's ever a podcast.
Oh my God,
And
what did
so
you find?
now I'm going to,
Thankfully, I have no mugshots.
yeah, do I have the paper? I have the receipts,
No.
all of the receipts. Thankfully, it's nothing sketchy.
Oh
Nothing
my God.
sketchy
Yeah,
at
I'm
all.
not that. Listen, I'm messed, but it's like my friends like to call me a sophisticated ratchet. So, you know.
Oh wait, can you okay, let's just start there. Like what's like the beyond like the mess part of it, you know, the ratchet piece of this and everything else, like why? What is it about you that's so because I a lot of people obviously, Sasha, just look at you and they're like, you're just so fun size, and you know, they're like, she's just so sweet, and those are the people who've like never met you,
Yeah.
never listened to the podcast or anything like that. They're like, oh my god, so demure. What other words could I think of? Those are some good words.
A
But
Hufflepuff. Someone
Hufflepuff.
Mary, when she did her RHAP takeover, I think like she put me in Gryffindor, but so I messaged her saying like, "Oh my God, I've never like I feel like I'm a Slytherin, like that's the vibes I give off." And she said, "Well, it was between Gryffindor or Hufflepuff," and I was like, well, "Hufflepuff?
Oh my
Ooh, not
gosh.
me."
You're just dragging yourself. This is like I
Slytherins are the
what
best. What do you mean?
damn. But okay,
Please.
but like what? Oh, I have so many questions. I think we just need to
Anyway,
like go
yes.
back. I think we just need to go like way back because one of the things I think is just so fascinating, and you are probably like the first and only person to say, "Oh, I'm not interesting. Like, I don't have anything to share." But like, you have had probably one of the most interesting dynamic backgrounds when it comes to RHAP, and like one of the things that I remember even just seeing out there in the world with you is maybe it's like a tweet where someone's like, meet Sasha, who is like something to the fact of like a Jewish woman from India who like also does this, who also does that, who's like all these things. And I'm like, yeah, she needs to come on Pod Friends because
I have no idea
ratings,
what tweet you're even
all
talking.
ratings, I have no clue. But you know, like what's kind of like your life story? In other words, like
Yeah.
going way back like to your childhood, um and all of that, like what, yeah, just like talk to me because there's not even a question because I have so many questions. I'm a
I
mess.
know I
Thank
have
you.
my a thing ready. I feel like I always have it. But yeah, I was
uh,
born in India in Mumbai actually. Which is the largest city I believe in India. So, your girls used to big cities. Yeah, so I
mm,
lived there till I was 14 with my parents, but then my parents got divorced. My dad actually ended up moving and still lives in New York. So it was just
mm,
my mom and I, but also we have a huge family on both sides, like on my mom and my dad's side. So it was always people around. So that was kind of like my life in India. I was listening to Mari as well, and
yeah.
I also ran track and did lots
Oh
of
no.
sports in India where so that was like my life where I was kind of like the bully, but not like I never bullied girls, like I only bullied boys. So,
Ooh,
she was a feminist growing up.
yes.
Yeah, where and I was yeah, and I would
We
only
love
bully the
that.
popular kids. Like it
You were
wouldn't
one of the popular kids.
I don't know. I don't know that I was popular, but yeah, I don't think I always had friends. I'm an only child,
Hmm.
so I had no choice but to make friends. If that
Yeah.
it's like you going home to nobody, so you need to make some friends. Like no one your age.
Yeah.
So I like didn't have I didn't have a choice but to make friends. So that's like kind of my vibe. Like I was always am rather a competitive person. I like it because I'm that kind of the only child. I like, spotlight. I like being the center of attention. Like these are things I very much know about myself. So I was always part of like things like that, even in school. I was lucky enough to go to a really probably top 10 private school. So where, I was learning languages where arts was just as important as like STEM, which
Yeah.
especially when you think of stereotypical India, right? Like those aren't things that you think about. But
Mm.
I used to run track and I used to, be in plays. Like I was my fair lady.
Yeah.
Yeah, at a play. Just here we are. Um so I like those are kind of things I've always liked to do. And then when I was in ninth grade, my mom finally decided it was time to move to these here United States. So,
Yeah. And what
yeah,
one of the things that I found out, and I'm like very curious about this, is that you moved. Apparently, did you move like a day before your freshman year in high school, or a week
literally the
before?
night. Like I
The night.
landed in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma from Mumbai, India, like at 9, and then you have to go to school the next morning. Like
Oh
I
my.
remember being so scared. But again, because I feel like I watched a lot of TV and we visited America, I think every 2 years. So it wasn't like this place I'd never been to. Like it was, I like have been to Oklahoma many times before.
Wow.
So I was just like, yeah, like I know where I'm going, but it's still weird to go to high school because you think of all the movies. So I remember, and this is like what a vain thing, but I was like, what all should I like shave? Like do it because in India, like that's not a
Yeah.
thing. Like you
Oh my
don't,
gosh.
yeah, like your legs, like you just. none
Yeah.
of my friends, I don't believe, shaved. And we were
Yeah.
15-year-old like Indian girls, like we got hair. So I remember that was like my first question to my cousins. I was like, so like, do people? And then she was like, yeah, you should probably shave your hands and in addition to your legs. And I was like, oh my god. So I remember spending like an
Oh my god.
hour,
And that was
and
also
then
at like a time too, because we're like
yes,
I turned 30 this year, like we're around
mhm.
basically the same age. And like
Welcome.
that was
Yes,
also at a time with media where like everyone was so big on like laser hair removal and like women
yes.
shouldn't have any hair of any
And the
sort. And
pencil
oh,
eyebrows, like, that was the thing. Horrible.
terrifying.
Thankfully, I never fell for that, but I
Yeah.
remember, yeah, my cousin, like, plucking my eyebrows, and then my mom was like, "What's wrong with you?" Like, because my mom's a
Yeah.
cosmetologist, so she's like, "I will just do the like, why aren't you letting me do it?" And I was like, "No, I need to be like an American teen." So I remember, like, silly things like that, like, is what I was most stressed about because I I knew that I would do well in school just because I was like, "It's America." Like, I knew I was smarter. Um, they
You
tried to
knew our
put me
schools were trash.
yeah, they tried to put me in, like, like, AS like, English as a second language class, and I was
Yeah.
like, "No, like, what?
Wow.
What is wrong with you?" I went to,
Wait,
like, a
wait, I'm so
private
curious
school in
even just
India.
about that part because like like when you were growing up in India, you like because this is part of my question about the
Mhm.
transition that you had. Like, there's obvious. Well, what I would imagine is like, okay, there are adjustments when it comes to culture, and like
Yeah.
we talked about hair a little bit, but like even with language and not even like literally the English language, but just how people speak because there's all
Mhm.
the slang and like just the way that people speak. And you were in freaking Oklahoma? Like
Yeah.
what? You're First of all, let me just put this out there that like I've never been to Oklahoma. A lot of people haven't been to Oklahoma. So the fact that you'd been there multiple times before is jarring to hear.
Yeah,
But
my
like
aunt lived there, my mom's sister, so that's the
that
reason why we moved. Yeah.
that makes a lot more sense. But
Mhm.
like what was that transition actually like for you, and how did people like it sounds like the school, how did they perceive you when you made that shift? Because again, you got there within 24 less probably within 12
Yeah.
hours of starting school, which is wild to think about.
I know, it really like, when I say this story but I really don't remember being scared, like, I was just kind of excited because, in India, ninth and 10th grade so you graduate high school in 10th grade, then you
Mhm.
go to, like it's called junior college, basically, for 11th and 12th, so I remember being like, "Yo, I just, escaped boards," which are, like,
Yeah.
very hard in India, like, you're, like working year round to like get through a lot of kids like go through ridiculous amounts of pressure and just awful things. So I remember being like, thank god I don't have to do that. We made it, and that
Yeah.
was, I think, my mom's like ace in the hole, like, if because I was not really wanting to go, and she's like, well, you won't have to work as hard. So I was like, cool, we move it, we're going. So yeah, so I don't know, I don't remember I remember being excited. The worst part, and if any educators are out there, is lunch. I feel like
Yeah.
the idea of lunch in lunch tables in American school systems are horrible. Because if you don't know anyone, you're
Yeah.
screwed. Like, where am I gonna sit? So I remember being like, great, so we're gonna go to the library, that's where we're gonna hang out for the first day, and then we'll figure it out from there because we're gonna get to track practice that night, and I'll probably make friends there.
Yeah.
But I was just lucky enough that I because the counselor ended up testing me for everything, and I was in all pre-AP classes instead of freaking trying to hold me back a grade.
Yeah.
So I ended up making friends pretty quickly, and I had like social strategy, right? So I was like, we need to find lunch friends. Like, that is the goal of today. So and I
This is
ended
like
up
Mean
finding
Girls. Well,
yeah, like
like
I
Mean
was just like,
Girls, like the
where do I sit?
lunchroom scene. Yeah,
Exactly, and I'm wearing
wow.
pink, look at this. Um, but yeah, so I remember, like, those were kind of, like, what I was, thinking about, and I made friends so quickly. Like, it was the I met the kindest people there, that I'm, still friends with a few of them. I had like a huge friend group. We all ran track together. So we ended up having this huge friend group all 4 years of high school. And like I obviously had an accent, like a thick accent. But and I remember they would make me like read signs, just so like because they were like, this is so
Oh,
funny,
yeah.
to hear because I would say secretary, not secretary, and all these
Yeah.
things. And I was like pretty quick to join clubs. Like I was in there. I was like, great, how do we do this? Let's move, let's make friends. So when I was in Oklahoma, it was fine. But I actually moved to Texas for a year and a half. And my
Ooh.
mom ended up meeting my stepdad. So that was harder. People in San Antonio, not all people,
Right.
but yeah, the school was pretty hard. I didn't really have that many friends. I was part of a Jewish youth group, so I had friends there, but they never went to my high school. So I just kept in touch with everyone in Oklahoma, and I was lucky enough that for senior year we ended up coming back to Oklahoma. But I just yeah, I felt so grateful that it felt easy to be in school there. Like I didn't have any like bullying or any of like people making me feel othered for though at least those things. But like at home it was weird because I was living with four other teenagers because it was my aunt and my cousins. So, imagine four teenagers, five teenagers, four girls, one guy. Um,
Yeah.
the phone, like, and this is back
Ooh.
in the day, right, when you couldn't use the phone and the internet at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's like
Ugh.
a girl's trying to open up MySpace, but someone else is trying to, be like on the phone with their friend. So I remember those things being much harder, and my life was easier in India. Like my mom had her own business and stuff like that. So, but my mom worked at Subway,
Yeah.
and didn't drive, in America. So our life was much harder, although I don't know that my mom ever made me feel that, but,
Yeah.
now looking back, I was like, "Oh, yeah, we, like, stayed in that like, not an attic, but, like, a den on a
Yeah.
blow-up mattress, for, like, 2 years until, we were grateful enough that my mom met my stepdad, and our life, like, significantly upgraded, just overall. But so looking back, it was harder, but in that moment, I never felt like, oh, my life sucks, but yeah, we
Yeah.
weren't as well to do, just my mom and I, right? Like she's working at Subway
Yeah.
for 2 years while, I'm trying to figure out high school. Yeah, and then
Yeah.
I went to college, basic, and then yeah, I moved to San Francisco, another country, obviously. Um,
Yeah.
yes, for work, and I've been a Jewish a professional for the past 7 years doing
This
that.
is there's so much
I know,
there
sorry, I, like,
to
ranted. I was,
no,
like,
no,
trying to
no.
conceal
It's
it, but
beautiful because like that's what this is though. That's what it is. And I think
yes.
especially when like especially in the context of podcasts, like
Mhm.
the thing that was not most difficult for me early on, but just something that was a little jarring is, as members of for me at least, as members of class of 2020, when we were introducing ourselves at first, some like Rob would graciously hand it over and
Yeah.
say, like, Sasha, tell the people about you. And then you would probably like you wouldn't say any of what you just said. It would basically be like, hi everybody, I'm Sasha. I've been listening to RHAP for X number of years, and I love I like if you're on the Big Brother podcast, I love Big Brother. I've been watching a long time, and then that's it. And so we miss out on like so many of these details
Mhm.
that I almost feel like with everyone I've interviewed, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm just so glad that someone's asking me these questions about my life. But I'm like, I want to even go back more in your life because, well, one thing I'm curious about, you mentioned your mom had a business in India. What was her business?
She was a cosmetologist,
Oh, that's she
or
was doing
is.
that while in
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
India.
Mhm. Yeah, she
Damn.
started it actually the year I was born.
Hmm.
So yeah, she'd had it for 15 years before we moved. Actually, she still has it in India.
Yeah.
It's still going. She just has
Oh,
someone
nice.
manage it for her. So yeah, it's like that's why again I've seen, my just a strong woman in my life. which probably shaped me to be so strong, where I was like, yeah, I don't think I need anyone. Like, it's just been my mom and I for so long, that it never, anything else like didn't really matter. And that's why I think that that's where maybe that resilience comes from.
Yeah, and the other piece of all of this that I think is so interesting is that you were just like you're the player who enters the Big Brother house on day one. You're the Tiffany, it sounds like. Or
I
it sounded
wish.
like when you were navigating everything. And one thing I don't even know how to transition into it, but like you were on reality TV growing up. Apparently, what are you talking? How do people not know that we cover reality shows, Sasha? This is like the most important information.
Yeah,
You
I
were
think I
on.
shared that in my interview.
I hope
But
so, rather
yes,
than like
I
sweeping it
know,
under the
because
rug.
Rob was like, "Can you share like your connection to reality TV?" I was like, "Well, I was on it." But but one was like a dance show. So in India, like Bollywood dancing, right? What a I tried to do classical dance, and the
Yeah.
lady like told my mom, "This is not it." Like, she is not centered. Like, there's too much energy, basically, is what that auntie said. "It's fine, lady, whatever. Screw you."
I feel hurt by that.
Yeah, my mom is, like, classically trained, so that's why
Yeah.
my mom was like, "Oh, it's important, like, Sasha, you should do it.
Wow.
It helps, like, with discipline and, all this stuff," and I was like, "Sports." So I ended
Yeah.
up, yeah, being part of a few dance troupes, in India. So, when I was doing that, we were on one, like, dance reality show called Boogie Woogie is what it was called. I still remember it was the Christmas special, and I was like, "But I'm Jewish," and everyone was like, "What's Jewish?" Imagine in India trying to explain to people,
Oh my
like,
gosh.
"I'm not Christian." They were like, "But if you're not Hindu, Muslim, or any of the 18 other, like, you must be Christian."
Oh my gosh.
Um,
So you were on that was one reality show you
yeah,
were on.
yeah. So it was like a dance show. I think I was on it twice. I honestly can't even remember. I think twice with
Oh,
two
look at
different
that.
dance
Look at
troupes.
that flex right there.
I
I
I
think
like
I was on it, but like also I've kind of like glowed up a lot since then, so I don't even
Oh,
remember.
100%, 100%. I mean, I'm not a better dancer. I'm definitely was a better dancer then, but still.
Yeah.
And, yeah, and I was on a show called MTV Select, so I was on MTV, I think in the 6th grade. I believe we skipped school. I, like, was calling my mom actually right before this podcast, and I was
So
like,
wild.
"Yo, how did this happen? Like, how did you let me go?" Because my mom wasn't part of it.
Yeah.
So I just remember that it
Wow.
was some listen, you're living in Mumbai, that's like living in LA, right? Like Bollywood
Yeah.
is all around. So I just remember some girl was like, "Hey, my mom has this connection. They want some like kids on the show. Do you want to come?" Like, that's all I remember. This was in the 6th grade. So I don't know like all the details, but somehow we showed up, and I still remember we auditioned, me and this girl that was actually my rival in sports, but we had to be best friends because it was the best friends special. And we did it. Day one, we got to like the main show, and then the next day, I remember telling my mom. My mom and I cannot remember how like I ended up there the first day, but the second day, I remember like getting permission, doing all of that, and we were like on the show with the guy. It was called MTV Select, and I think we won that episode. Like, it
Wait,
was like a
what happened?
friendships day like special, and you had to do like a bunch of tasks to like win.
Like Among Us, but real life, where you have to like get rid of your rival or like what was the
No,
situation?
you and your
Yeah.
friend had to work together against another friend pair. And
Yeah.
like it was like, silly like MTV games in like the 90s, right? Or 2000s, where it was like on a set, and you probably had to like I don't even know what we had to do, but I just remember meeting the host who was famous, and I was like, "This is so cool."
Do you think that there's like footage of this that
I
exists
wish I could
somewhere?
find it. I've tried so hard to look for it. Unfortunately, in the move, my mom is very passionate about taking pictures,
Yeah.
but all of our albums got ruined, with
Mm.
flood damage. So, it might have been somewhere in there, but she's gone. Who knows? So I did
Oh.
ask the girl that I was with. I actually messaged her on Instagram, being like, "Do you remember how the hell did we get on this show?" But we
Did
We could not remember.
Are you okay? Good. You're not like I thought that was gonna end, and she never messaged back because she
No,
hates me more
no.
than ever.
No,
Um,
we're like still friends. When I go to
good.
India, we'd still
Yeah.
meet up. I have a
Oh,
few friends still in Mumbai that I talk to. Yeah.
wait, that's so amazing to all hear about. There's like so much already, and I'm just glad that I could like skip around to all these
Yes,
different things because
totally.
something else that you just mentioned. I love that you were on not only MTV Select but also Boogie Woogie is the other name of the show. Like that's such a great name for a dancing reality show, and
Yeah,
I
exactly.
feel it's so sad that that didn't become like the next American Idol, like
I
globally and
know.
all of that. But
Yeah, it was huge in India. Like it was like you would like sit on whatever day it came out to watch that. Like all the dance troops.
I bet there are some people who are listening and watching who recognize you from that. Like now that you
No
mention
way.
it, they
There's
were
no way.
like,
I was like a
your
kid.
fans are passionate and they're probably here now. But I'm just saying, if like somehow someone saw this, I wouldn't even be surprised just because like
I
you're
mean, I'm sure
famous.
they know what Boogie Woogie is. Like that's for sure. And if anyone knows
Yeah.
MTV Select with Nicole Chinapa, let me know.
There we go. There we go. But you mentioned something, which was that with Boogie Woogie, you did the Christmas special, and you were like, "Oh my gosh, I'm Jewish," and people were like, "What are you talking about? What does that even mean?" So something that I'm so curious about with your background because, like, I know that for a lot of people, especially in the U.S., especially because like I not only grew up like with like a lot of Jewish people around, but also went to college like with a lot of Jewish people too. Like the idea of an Indian Jew is like so, oh my god, no pun intended, but like so foreign to
Yeah.
people. And I didn't even realize that I know that there's a history of like Judaism in India. And I also just mention this, like, we don't, because this is not going to become the history podcast, but
No,
like,
please.
I'll say like something that I'm so thankful for is that my mom, long, beautiful story, but my mom actually taught like Jewish studies in a
Wow.
university for a long time just because she was like so fascinated by the culture. So I'm sure she knows all this, but I don't because I'm
Yes.
not her. So like how did that happen that you were like that you were Jewish and in India and like I guess I have questions just because it sounds like there weren't a lot of people around you who also were Jewish growing up.
Yeah, it's a like India has a population of what, 1 billion plus people. And
Yeah.
I believe in Mumbai, there are technically two sects of Jews, like one's from Baghdad and then one which is what I'm part of called the Bene Israeli Jews. And we allegedly are like a lost tribe because
Mm,
we've been in India, because it's Judaism in general is an oral tradition, but definitely for Jews of India, it's an oral tradition where we're not entirely sure. Like there was some shipwreck either from Spain, something like that. I wonder if my grandma did a 23andMe, like if we're able to find out, but probably not
yeah.
because we've been in India, I think since like 16th century, like some are ridiculous.
Wow.
Like we're an old community, like it's
Yeah.
not this like new thing that came up. But yeah, so Indian like the Jews have been in India for a long, long time. And
Hmm.
actually one of the only places in the world that anti-Semitism wasn't as prevalent. Just because maybe people didn't
Yeah.
know us or everyone looks the same, right? It's a pretty homogenous country.
Yeah.
In at least looks wise. Like you can tell if someone's from the south or north of India, like just
Hmm.
unfortunately because of the color and because we were colonized, there's a lot of colorism and stuff like that. And I mean, like the amount of languages in India, it's like off the charts.
Yeah.
But everyone technically, right, like looks the same, um, and or has is like on a spectrum of brown.
Right.
So, yeah, so that's something like really interesting as well about Indian Jews. So they're Bene Israeli Jews, where I'm from. I think there were like 5,000 of us, so not that many, but
Yeah.
we were a pretty close community when I was, and even now, but especially when I was in India. I keep kosher even now, which if anyone knows like what halal is, it's kind of the same idea, but my grandpa cut the kosher meat for the synagogue, and the synagogue was like 5 minutes away from where we lived. So being Jewish, I felt like was more accessible when I lived in India, versus when actually, obviously, living in Oklahoma. And in the Bay
Yeah.
Area, it is easier, right? It's just higher population, and more Jews of color,
Yeah.
as well. But so yeah, so in India, we have this community that is like frozen in time, where it's pretty traditional in some sense, and has like a lot of unique Indian rituals, like woven into like our rituals as well. Like we take our shoes off before we go into synagogue, which I think
Yeah.
is very much a Indian Jewish thing,
Mm.
because Hindus like do that before they go into temple. So I
Mhm.
think there's a lot of assimilated beautiful practices, but yeah, it's just like this like community that like that's been there for I don't know how long, just a long, long time.
Yeah, it's so interesting though to like even hear about your experiences with this, and I feel like my mind is like slowly like growing, like I actually feel it expanding as we talk about
You're
this.
so kind.
It's real, and that's the cool thing, like the ability to dive into these things and also just like the nuances of it. Because for me, when I hear Oklahoma, I'm like, I don't want to go. I'm not gonna go. You're not gonna find me there. Nowadays, especially, I'm like Texas. Ooh, no, I don't know. Not gonna. Give it some
I hear
time.
that.
Post pandemic, especially.
Oh my god, yes.
But like it's cool to kind of hear the positivity in those experiences too, because sometimes, like with any identity, right, I think sometimes we boil it down, we have a great habit of either like ignoring the identity and not learning about it, which is definitely something I realize happens a lot with Jews in the US.
Mhm.
um, or we like boil it down to trauma, and it's like you're a victim and everything sucks, and like I pity you and I feel bad for you. And so like one thing I'm curious about, even before kind of continuing more into your story and college and everything else, is what like what were some of those beautiful moments of like being this like and again, the tweet that I remember seeing was like, Sasha's a like a Jew. I don't know how they phrase it, but it's like a Jewish Indian who lived in Oklahoma and now lives in the Bay
Oh, I
Area.
think yes, I know
Yes,
exactly what you're talking about. Yes, it was an article about me.
probably you're
Because
famous.
because I had
You
just
are.
I had just moved to San Francisco, and they were like, a Jew of color. Oh my God.
I couldn't
We
believe it.
gotta do, yeah, they were like, we gotta do
Yeah.
yeah, so it was a Jewish newspaper, yes, the
Yeah.
J weekly in oh my God, in San Francisco. Yes. It was like a very kind article. I just, wish they talked a little bit about like my professional life too, not just my identity, but
Yeah. Like who you
we
are
we
as a
love
person.
we love it.
Yeah. Oh my
Anyway, but
gosh.
oh yeah, yeah. I think it's like from Mumbai by the way of Oklahoma.
Oh yeah,
I think is what the
that's
article
probably
was.
something like that. I like
It was
literally
really funny.
saw
Yes.
it before this. I was like, oh, okay, that's a way to really
Yeah, that was 6 years ago because it was just when I had moved to San Francisco.
damn.
But yeah, um being Jewish has just like been part of my identity for as long as I can remember. Like Shabbat, or the
Yeah.
Sabbath is like my favorite thing ever. And for many reasons, I think it's just who doesn't like a break, right, for the weekend. And Judaism
Yeah.
like literally commands you to be like, you gotta break on Friday night until Saturday night.
Hmm.
And it's just there's like these built-in rituals I think that I'm most fascinated by, and that I'm like, yeah, this is why I feel like I'm Jewish, not because necessarily like, oh, I love Torah, even though I do, I'm a nerd like that. But it's more that like I'm just so fascinated by how like the rituals just kind of hold me together sometimes. I think especially with these past 2 years, right, I have
Yeah.
found a lot of just connection in ritual. And like ritual could be reading a book, right? Like it doesn't need to be religious ritual. Just for me personally, Shabbat or the Sabbath is like what I find a lot of like exhaling, you know, in
Yeah.
and yeah, so that's why it's just Judaism has always been
Mhm.
that for me.
Yeah.
And being a person of color, right? And yeah,
Yeah.
especially in Oklahoma, where a lot of they don't look like me and my family.
Yeah.
So, you know, when you show up to synagogue and folks are just kind of like, "What? Are you lost?" And
Ugh,
I remember,
yeah.
yeah, being opting out of Jewish spaces because I was asked if I was adopted or if I was
Yeah.
half Jewish, and it's like, which half? And you know, or being like, oh, you know, like being asked to perform, right, for white people,
Mhm.
especially in those spaces. So it's like if anyone out there is listening, like stop asking people where are you really from? Like that's weird.
Yeah.
Um but
Ugh.
and I'm happy like in this moment to share because it's like that, you know, that's why I'm on this podcast. But you know, when I'm like at services, like I don't want to like share about my family
Yeah.
necessarily. So yeah, it's like it's this like push and pull of like no, I belong here, but also like I don't want to deal with this. I'm gonna do it at home moment. But that's why I feel like I'm in Jewish life now because I don't know that there's a lot of representation for people of color, women of color, you know, in especially in like executive leadership spaces. So
Mhm.
that's something like it was very important to me about Judaism, where I was like, well, I love Judaism and I know that it's great. And in India, it felt so accessible. So, like, what can I do, you know, to bring that here? And that's what I'm excited that I get to do. And I get to like push people because I don't have, I have no shame when it comes to like marking my space and taking up space.
Oh, we love that. And
I
that's
know.
I think it's so interesting, like, the role of I always think the role of identity is fascinating because for me in my work a lot, and I mean life, but in my work, I think about it so much. And I know that it's something that applies a lot to your work too. And so I guess something I wonder in thinking about identity is like, what is it that because we'll come back to we will
Mhm.
obviously come back to it. We'll like talk more about that. But I'm almost curious, like, what is it when people kind of just see you as your identity without like all of the other amazing things that you are? Like, what is it that they're missing about you? And um, like, what is it typically that they distill you down to inaccurately?
Yeah, I think the biggest one, right, has to be like, are you, you know, supposed to be here? Like that's the biggest thing. I think this might be true for a lot of women that are younger, but maybe in like mid-level management positions. Like at one of my older jobs, I remember being in a room where I was like it was a fundraising intensive because you know I was like the top in my region like I as in I was the director, so
Yeah.
I needed to be there. And I remember like folks that are, you know, and not to like be annoying in that way, but folks that are like less, I don't know, not lesser than me, but like, yeah,
Right.
whatever.
Like
Yes,
lower
thank you.
yes, like
Rank or
in the
whatever. Like,
chain
not
of
that I'm in the
command,
military,
whatever you
but
call that. Yeah, exactly.
mhm. But, you know,
Yeah,
sometimes you have to
exactly.
pull rank, and that's just the truth.
Right.
But I remember someone being like, "Oh, the new professionals is over there," and I was like, "No, but I'm almost
Ooh.
30." Like, what? And I think especially for shorter women, like I'm 5'1", and I think I sound also pretty young, that, it's harder for us to, like, take up that space. So it wasn't easy, you know, when I was first starting out. And I
Mhm.
was grateful that I had a lot of mentors and allies that were able to create spaces for me. But yeah, I think when my identity, it's like um when folks see me, I think it's the outer is so interesting that folks are like wanting to know more. But you know, now, right, you might not know that I like podcasts about reality TV. Like, you know,
Right.
who like how I don't want to share that necessarily the first thing, but that's something you might not know about me. Or yeah, that like I'm, you know, good at X, Y, and Z, whatever that may be for the in that moment that I would rather be talking about instead of maybe like being an Indian Jew, which it's who I am and I will always talk about it, but I don't want that to be the only, you know, like I'm not a no human is one dimensional. So how do
Exactly.
you like accept all of, you know, people of color? Because I think we get so exoticized, for a lack of better
Yeah.
word.
Yeah, and it's a struggle. I think this is something maybe it's not that much of a struggle. I think I just like overthink it because I also could totally relate to what you're saying and have been in that situation also as someone who like looks younger than they are. And thankfully I'm like more than 6 feet. So like I don't get that. But like they're like, oh, it's just like a tall baby who walked into the
Mhm.
room. Like, oh, look at him. Oh my God. And so I think it's interesting to kind of talk about this balance between how our identities actually inform who we are and how we show up, because like a lot of people, especially people who don't have underrepresented identities, like don't even think about how, like, because those are a lot of ways our identities can be our
Mhm.
superpowers and they're what make us
Yeah.
unique in spaces. And so I always struggle with that balance because I'm like, am I asking too much about this one identity, or am I just like digging deep on the thing that people, especially I'll say especially white people, but like again,
Mhm.
people from, not from marginalized groups don't
Yeah.
dig into, and like they don't know how to ask these questions typically. But wow, this is deep. Like what's the I don't know if you've talked about this yet, but like what's the work that you're doing now?
Yeah, I'm currently a project coordinator for Jewish Women of Color Resilience Circle. So
Mm,
it's basically a cohort for amazing women. You don't have to be Jewish. That's just what I think it was founded on. And now this year actually we're going to be centering Black women and again not Jewish, just Black women in general.
yeah.
And really, anti-Blackness in our communities. Which I know I'm sure like I want to make a note that if you aren't like a part of a minority group and you're listening to this podcast, it's not necessarily to pile on. It's just
Yeah.
like because it might feel that way sometimes, and I understand that. But I think it's more that like the richness just finally is getting talked about on here, so I also want to make that note.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the work I'm doing, where I'll be launching a cohort to center badass Black women and
Yeah.
women of color and do a lot of like transformation. Like we'll so I'm currently planning retreats and finding places, like finding private chefs and
Ooh.
finding like abundance, because that's
Yeah.
something I think women of color, right, just maybe when we're are not always right accustomed to, like I
Hmm.
we're not all poor. I just mean it doesn't always happen.
Hmm.
So how do we, as like transforming like social justice, but we first need to nourish ourselves. So that's currently the work I'm doing, is like figuring all that out.
Yeah, and maybe just to add like another dimension to what you even explained, like I could beyond everything that you said so brilliantly, this does not, well, I don't need to say it, but I think some people need to hear it, is just like there's also this thing where sometimes, at least like me speaking, like for me and my identities, like where you
Mhm.
don't feel like you belong, or you don't feel like you're welcome, or like you don't think that X thing is for this type of person. Like we've heard obviously it's total BS, but like we've heard the phrase like, oh, that's not a thing that women do. Oh, that's not a thing
Mhm.
that like this type of person does, that Indian people do, that Black people do, that like queer people do, whatever it might
Yeah.
be. So I think it's really cool that you're creating those spaces where it really becomes like not only safe, but encouraged to take that space for yourself, when so often like it's I hear it so often, but it's just like Black women are carrying so much weight of so many people, and then you also have to think about like Black trans women, we think about
Mhm.
Black queer women, like all of these other intersecting identities, right? And so damn, I'm glad that you're in the world doing the work that you're doing. Like what, I mean, maybe this is something you've touched on and it's obvious, but like what motivates you to kind of show up in the world in that way? Because again, so many people know you as like hashtag messy queen, Sasha Joseph all over the place. But like what motivates you to spend your energy in the ways that you're doing, as you mentioned?
Yeah, I think about this a lot too. So I ended up quitting my job in July, like an old job, and I remember getting on, I think I was on RHAP, like, right after and then I remember, like, telling Rob, "Oh, yeah, I'm currently unemployed," and Rob was like, "You'll find a job so quickly, like, this is a great time."
Wow.
So it's so funny because I was unemployed from July to November, actually, because I had to take a hard look at myself, and these past 2 years, I weirdly had a few, like, 2 jobs, in these past 3, 4 years, whatever the math
Mhm.
is.
Right.
But I finally decided that, I have to be in systems that serve me, not the other way around. And this is true for anyone out there, right? Like, I don't just mean for
Yeah.
people of color. I just mean like these and because of COVID, I think in these past 2 years, I have definitely felt the calling, of like doing purposeful work for my people, and for and I've been thinking a lot about women of color and Jewish women of color. And, if I'm going to be working overtime, I'm going to, overtime, quote unquote, and I'm going to be, working weekends, like I want to be in service of my people. Like that was my biggest thing. So, I realized that my job at that moment was beautiful and fulfilling in a lot of ways, but not what I wanted to be doing for, my future. Because I was
Mhm.
volunteering a lot with, like, with women of color voting and all of these kinds of things before this job. So I was like, oh, this is what brings me joy. And I sit on a few boards and racial justice task force. So I was like, oh, this is like, like Marie Kondo, right? Like, does this spark joy?
Yeah.
But that's what I had to do, a hard look at myself and say, okay, I think that's what I want to do. So this sounds wild. I don't even think I've told Rob this, but I quit my job. And then the next day, Rob and Scott offered me Love and Hip Hop. So I was like, is this like Kismet? Like what? Um,
Oh
and
my
not even
gosh.
that it
Yeah.
was for like, it's not like I can make a living off of Love and Hip Hop, but it was more
Right.
that I think the universe was like, oh, like you'll be fine eventually. Like we will figure something out. And I want to note my privilege in it, right? Like my husband could support me financially in that moment, living in the damn Bay Area. So
Yeah.
it's something that we were able to do financially also. But I just want to say to people, like, don't be in systems that don't support you, like professionally, personally. Like work ain't gonna love you back. There's no way, um and what does that mean for you, so that's like how I ended up like in this current space, because I just knew that I wanted to be like serving a purpose. And my boss is just perfect, honestly. But
Um,
she introduced me to a mentor, and she talked about my podcast, and she was like,
yeah.
Sasha's doing such great work in the world. And she was like, here's her Love and Hip Hop podcast. Here's her Never Have I Ever podcast. And I was like, oh my God.
Here's her live feed update. Here's
Yeah.
her like
So, but it's like,
yeah.
how grateful am I that I'm in a space that's able to like, like fulfill me completely, and that's able to see all of me. And that was what was important to
Mm,
me. So I was like turning down job applications left and right, because I was like, no, I want to be making a certain amount of money. It's time. I have a freaking master's degree. Like I've
yeah.
supervised 5 people at once. Like, I have all of this. So like it's time. How do I make this happen? So yeah, so that's how it was wild, but it was really important for me to do that for myself, because I don't know that I could, tell someone else, like give someone else advice or mentor someone when I am
Yeah.
not, happy myself. So yeah, that's how I ended up here in this work.
Wow. And the thing I love about this is that, I mean, obviously this is not live, it's recorded. So, like, it'll
Hmm.
be a while. This will have to come out for us to
Yeah.
hear the feedback from people. But I already know that, like, that story of making this bold leap of like quitting your job and really following how you feel and following how you want to be treated and how you deserve to be treated is something that will like resonate with a lot of people, just because I know that that's one of the themes that I've heard feedback from different people, like people who don't know what path they want to be on, people who
Hmm.
feel unhappy with where they are. And it's really easy to say like, oh, just do what you love, like do the thing that you love, like figure out how to do that, but it's also a lot harder for people to sometimes get there. And one thing I'll just say too quickly, without like going into my whole story with this, because
I
like
know.
this is
What's
not
your
this is
pod
the
friends
Sasha,
coming
but
out?
like I'll yeah, I know, right? But I'll mention, like, I switched jobs in the middle of the pandemic, and like, you know class of 2020, that's like June, July.
Mm-hmm.
BB22 was there, and I'd been at like my job for like 4.5 years at that point, and it was a really cool job. And like, the main thing I did, which I actually mentioned on RHAP a few times, because like there was a little bit of overlap while I was still in that job, was that I was working with NASA on like this program. And
Not an
I and
actual rocket
I was
scientist.
not. No, I'm not. No, it was like a community management, like storytelling type of like
That
program.
is
So
so
like
cool.
soft, and it was about people,
Wow.
and I got to like
Mm-hmm.
really meet like a really diverse range of people and share their stories. But like, the thing for me that was where I relate to you is George Floyd. I feel like so many episodes of this
Right?
podcast I mentioned George Floyd,
Oh my
because like
God.
the
And it's
timing of it,
important.
yeah, and
Yes.
but also like the timing of it and class of 2020 is like not even coincidental. It's like very much interlinked, and I think it comes up, and he comes up, and that horrible story comes up. But like, with that, that kind of stuff, a chain of events, which included me leaving my job, because I remember really advocating for, I've never talked about this anywhere, but like advocating for NASA to be like, Black Lives Matter, and to
Mm-hmm.
share that they stand for those things. And like, spoiler alert for people who love NASA, they didn't do that. They
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't do that. And so I said, like, I can't be in a place that won't protect me and my identities and
Yep.
like support me. And like, thankfully my current job also came up at that time, right? And so, that's like a piece of privilege of like, ooh, an opportunity came up where I was able to shift when I like needed it, spiritually, emotionally, all of it. But like, I'm kind of curious from you, like, what were some of the, I'm not even like curious to know like the hesitations as much, because I think a lot of people could understand the hesitations with like quitting your job. But like, what were some of the positive things that you were like reaching toward in doing that? Because again, most people don't think that they can do that. Thankfully, a lot more people realize that they can quit their jobs. And
Period. Great
period.
resignation,
It's
baby.
exactly. And like, but what was like
Yes.
what were you, or maybe it's not even a question like what you were reaching toward, because I am curious like how you wanted to be treated in that way. It's always cool to hear that. But like, is there advice you would have for people who are struggling with this idea of like, I'm unhappy but I also feel stuck?
Yeah, I think first is you really have to have a board of directors, is how I like to call it, right? Like
Mm,
every organization has a board, not every, sorry, but good amount of organizations have a board of directors.
right.
Who are your personal board of directors, right? Like who
Ooh, I
is
love that.
your chair and your co-chair, right? That can really, like for me, I think it's my mom and my husband, of course,
Hmm.
who are, gonna keep it real. Like my mom will drag if I need to be dragged, but also, will be like, you'll be fine. Just do what you need to do. But like
Uh-huh.
who are your board of directors that like one will hype you up? Like I think each person needs to serve a different purpose, much like a board.
Hmm.
And that's my number one thing is like you have to have a support system. And I don't mean a partner because I think like if one person is your everything, you in trouble, baby.
Right.
No.
Yeah, your partner's not your therapist is like a
A
very
period.
important thing for people to learn and remember.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I did a lot of networking, which I hate to do. Like you just follow me on LinkedIn today. Like I have like I
Yep.
think 200 something connections. So like because I've always had a job.
201, baby.
Yeah,
Woo!
because I've always had a job before I left my other
Yeah.
job, so I've never needed to do any of this stuff before. So I was like, how the hell am I gonna network without pissing people off or without like really talking bad about my job, but like
Yeah.
sharing the realities of what me as a person of color, um, being the only in a lot of these
Right.
spaces are expecting. So I like really was able to network with a lot of amazing. Like I had a list in mind. Like I want to meet someone that just quit a job and got a new one. I want to meet someone, talk to someone that is like super optimistic about life because like I
Mm,
wasn't feeling that, right? And then I was like, and I need to meet like a badass Jewish woman of color because that's what I want to be. So how do I get there? And So I like had almost like a list of things I needed to do, and type of job, and I decided that I need to be paid a certain amount.
Yeah.
That was another thing that was very important to me, but I don't like for you, right? Everyone has an like a non-negotiable. For me, it was money, and
Mhm.
take a hard look at what you've been doing. What do you hate about it? Don't
Yeah.
apply for another job if it's going to be the same. Because I remember when folks were like, "Oh, do you not know what you want?" And I was like, "No, I absolutely know what I want." I was like, "I don't want to be like quote unquote customer facing anymore. I'm tired of
Mhm.
being on the ground. Like I've done that since I was 25.
Yeah.
And it's mentally exhausting to build relationships. Like I was an engagement associate, like that was literally my job, was to build connections with college students. So
Yeah.
I was like, girl, I done. I don't want to anymore. Right. So what are your
Yeah.
like non-negotiables? And I think then I started looking at jobs and being okay with like a little bit of uncertainty. Doesn't mean you should, do what's best for you professionally, like financially. And if you can afford a coach, that's
Mhm.
another thing that really helped me. I am grateful that I was just happened to be in a professional development cohort
Yeah.
that gives me a free coach. So I was able to reach for them. But again, like figure out what is it that you are not happy about first, and then like almost write, like I literally had a document of like my dream job, and I would
Mhm.
pick random like job descriptions and like copy paste in there, like
Nice.
I like this paragraph from this paragraph from this job,
Mhm.
and then do that. I think I only interviewed one, and I definitely didn't get that job.
Yeah.
But that person I don't think knew who I was or like
Right.
what I was about. So I'm grateful. It's fine because I'm in much better space. But this job, I like in this was my second interview only. So I was very picky. And I know everyone thought I was crazy because I applied to a lot of tech jobs because I was like,
Yeah.
let's try tech. We're in the Bay Area. But I
Uh-oh.
knew my heart wasn't in it. I was like,
Right.
"Ah." Like I hope I don't get that
Ugh.
job. So yeah, I don't know. That's my like advice, I guess.
And I think it's great advice because you're saying that it's important to do two things. One of them is to, like, as you said very clearly, like to look at the ways that you don't want to be treated, the things
Mhm.
that you don't want in a job. But the other that you pointed to, even with job descriptions and lines you liked, is how do I want to be treated? And
Yeah.
so a habit that I'm like just learning because now I feel like, well, I'll say like now I have the privilege through my job to have like professional development where I have a coach who will ask like, how do you want to feel? And I'm like,
Mhm.
well, I don't want to feel. And then I catch myself. I'm like, oh, I have spent so much time, like a lot of people, thinking about what I don't want, right?
Mhm.
Instead of what you do. And, some people believe in like the law of attraction, like you kind of attract the things you spend
Yeah.
time thinking about. And so I think it's really important to do that. But something else I would say to add to what you were saying is that like some people might listen and say, well, I don't have professional development through my job and I
Mhm.
don't have anyone who supports me in my job, or like maybe they don't have some of the resources or privileges that you pointed to. But the cool thing is, especially with the internet, like you could reach out to people and
Yes.
informally build connections, and like you could have a podcast like this where you just like interview people about their lives and like
Yeah.
talk with them and get their advice and their wisdom. So there's always a way to do it if you want it badly enough, which I think is like kind of the thing. And like jobs, that's complicated and difficult, but
Mhm.
I'm glad that you could kind of explain some of the thought process there with how you've approached things. But there's like, I feel like there are a million things I could ask you about, Sasha. I'm gonna ask you this question, which is a
Mhm.
horrible question, but I already know you've got this. So if you were me and I was
Mhm.
you, what would you ask yourself right now?
Oh my god. Uh, I wonder.
This occurred to
Uh,
me like in the shower this morning, and I was like, let me try this one out.
yeah, I don't. I think, yeah, a little bit maybe about the class of 2020 journey. Is that like a fun thing to talk about? Do people care? I don't
I
know.
think people care. I think people care, and I do think it ties in a little bit with what you're saying
Yeah.
about well, how you want to be treated, but also you've mentioned it, like your boss being aware of the class of 2020 or of the podcasts. And something else that's on my mind that maybe ties in a little bit with your podcasting journey is like you did a podcast last year, I know, that was focused on Asian representation, which like in I have to thank you for, because I have to say, like, as much as I think about like Black representation and being a Black person, like to see that podcast in my feed was what actually gave me permission to do Black Voices of RHAP, because I was like, oh, this is a thing we could talk about now and do and create. But like, yeah, like what was it like for you? Oh, what, you know what? I actually I'm like geeking out a little bit because I love to hear like what people's I don't know if what we called it, like audition or interview
Oh my God, same. I
experience. So
love
like
to hear it.
what was your interview experience? Who was there? What did you talk about? Let's just start there because we're gonna then go into
Oh my God. Okay.
Do you remember?
So yes, I very like this is where I was sitting for it. I applied. So my friend Jason Orch, who is an RHAP patron who like introduced me to the world of RHAP back, I don't know, in when I was in college, 2011, maybe 2010. I don't
Wow.
know. Yeah, was like, oh, you like the Amazing Race, you should listen. So that was my way into RHAP. I only listened to Amazing Race coverage for a long time. And I could be wrong on the year, so don't come for me. Anyway, so yeah, so that was like my in, but I never followed anyone because I was like, all these people like post spoilers and like I want to watch my show, so I'm not gonna follow anyone. So I
Yeah.
didn't know about this class of 2020 thing happening. Because I think again, I was very like I listened to Allie and Brian on the challenge podcast, like, and you know, and then the Big Brother stuff,
Yeah.
right? But then my friend Jason shared, you know, like you should do this. And I was like, what do I have to share? You know, like who, like I'm just like a random. And he, you know, he was like, but like, did you forget your story? And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess that's cool. So I remember that it was June 26th, which I think was the last day of auditions, which is also my birthday. So I was like, girl, you gotta send it in.
Oh, you mean when
Yeah,
the
when the
thing
tape
was
was
due?
due.
What time do you know what time you submitted it?
It
Because
was in the
as I mentioned
morning.
to
Yeah,
Mari, it was I had like
that's why I was laughing. That's why I was like, no, it was June 26th. It was my birthday.
yeah, I have that habit sometimes. It was like a very much like, should I
Same.
do it? What do I
Yeah,
have to share with them? Would they want me? And then I just did
exactly.
it, which is obviously we're here now.
Yeah,
But
look
like
at us. Who would have thought?
you decided to actually do it and you
Yeah.
applied, and then you had your little
Interview.
interview. So what show did you talk about, and like
So
were
they
there a
told
million
me.
people there?
So they told me I needed to prep my own show. Yeah, so everyone else is always talking about like, oh, here's the show I wanted to talk about, right? Like Big Brother or whatever.
Yeah, or survive. Yeah.
Yeah, I was asked like present like unless I read it wrong, sorry Sam. But it was like I think Sam said like the email said like present like prepare a show for us to talk about. So obviously Love and Hip Hop was my show. So I was like, oh, this is the one I'm most passionate about. Let me talk about it, right? I opened the Zoom and then I did not think Rob would be on the Zoom. Okay, I want to
Same.
say that because I was like, oh, I think that'll be round 2 or 3 or final round of interviews, right? I'm like, I'm assuming nope. It was Rob. It was Jessica Leese. It was Mike Bloom and Josh Wigler were on my screen, and I was like, are you what? How dare this happen to me? So I'm stressed. I was like, this is flop. Like I don't know how I'm gonna do. I did not end up talking about anything except my background. Mike Bloom
Wow.
kept asking me questions about like, oh, like is that your wedding picture? Like what is this? What's that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I never and you know it was 10 minutes. And I remember all Rob asked me was, what's your connection to reality TV and like what shows do you watch? Thank God I said 90 Day Fiance.
Right?
Yeah, because Puya said that's what he heard. And that's why he ended up asking me to be on. But yeah, I didn't talk about any reality TV. I only talked about myself. So I was like, I always do this. I only talk about myself. And I never get like the conversation that I need across. This is so bad. So I assumed they would never call me back because I was like, this is ratchet. Like, what did I just do? Um,
Yeah.
and then I was one of the later ones where everyone else, right, got asked to do Big Brother, I think. But again, because I didn't talk about the shows I like
Yeah.
that much, I think they were just maybe nice enough to let me on. But I was, yeah, and that's how I randomly got a call. I
Yeah.
remember asking Sam, like, so when I go on the podcast, am I part of the class of 2020? Like, what?
Wait, when was your first podcast?
So my first podcast was the original Slop with Jenny Autumn. So I did like a little game with Rob and Jenny and Ryan. Uh
Yeah. Ryan
and
Po
I
Ryan Popola? Oh,
mhm,
I love that guy.
yeah,
He's a
so
wrestling guy, so I'm a big
yes.
fan of Ryan Popola.
Exactly. That's why I wanted to, yes.
Yeah.
And that's how, yeah, it was like a little segment that Sam I think had asked us, right, like to come up with the cast bio
Yeah.
game. So that was my first ever podcast, and I remember like messing up a little, but I was like, I think Rob laughed with me. I think Jenny laughed with me. I think we're good. And then that's how I kept getting called back for podcasts only, and I think I only did podcasts with Rob for a good
Yeah.
amount of time. Like I was only on the live shows with
Oh my
Rob.
gosh.
Yeah, and
That's
then Puya asked me to be on 90 Day Fiance. I think that was my first like real guest podcast.
Yeah, and I didn't
And
even watch
yeah.
90 Day. I mean, I still don't really watch
Mhm.
90 Day Fiance, but I remember listening around that time too. And specifically, I still remember hearing you on because I
Oh
remember
my
you talking like actually Puya also has done this a lot with 90 Day Fiance,
Mhm.
but just giving the perspective as someone who's like
Yes.
not from the US and like all these other dynamics within that.
Mhm.
So look, you made it. You glowed up,
Glowed
something
up. I
like
like
that.
glowed up better.
You
It's not
glowed up.
grammatically correct, but don't
You
come for
glowed
us.
up. You
Yes.
glowed up, and it was amazing. I will just mention to you as we're here, like I had everyone that you mentioned on my interview. I also had like 5 other people there, so
What the hell?
I don't want to. It's a whole thing. I don't
Oh
know.
my
It was
god.
great. There's a recording of it. That's the thing. All of them were
I
recorded
hope
somewhere.
they never
Oh,
ever
I hope
release
they
them.
do. If
No,
Sam
absolutely
Moore and
not.
Scott St. Pierre and Rob Cesternino are listening, release the tapes. Release
Do
the tapes.
not. Really?
Release like the a super cut, like of the best of
Let
those
me not
moments.
ever make it. I do remember Mike Bloom like asking me about representation and like
Yeah.
stuff like that. So I think that's the only like serious conversation I think I had. But they were probably like, "Oh, she can switch pretty quickly." Like, from
Yeah.
like being like funny and ratchet to
Right.
like when they were like, "So can you talk?" Cuz I remember talking about the challenge and all the like or, and the whole D situation had just
Yeah.
happened. So that's what I ended up talking about. I was like, well, as an Asian woman, we barely get any representation.
Yeah.
But all goes to Kevin, who came up with the idea. I just asked me to be on that podcast. But yeah, I just think that Asians especially, we like get forgotten. I don't know if that's the
Yeah.
right word. Because sometimes with the CBS, 50% rule, first of all, 50% is stupid. What does that even mean? Um,
Right. They just picked and they're like, "Oh, we like this number. It's half of 100. Let's do
yeah.
that." Right.
And from that, I feel like it becomes very binary, like literally black and white. And
Yeah.
then a lot of other identities get lost. And this doesn't equal stop having black people on. Like that's not what I'm saying. Don't come for me. All I'm saying is like I just wish, right?
If
Like we had
people
more
Oh my gosh.
Rohans and had more
Yes.
Hannah Chaddas, right? Like
You're so
think
right.
Karishma, right? Like
Mhm.
Ovi, like all these amazing South Asian. I'm only talking about South Asians because that's what I can remember right now. But right, like I'm just Derek X. It's like why are there only one of us? On these shows.
Yeah.
And the the Asian continent is so huge that even if you have two Asians, we don't have the same like connection at
Exactly.
all.
Yeah.
So I probably, because most of my friends in high school were black, I might connect way more with the black people
Mhm.
on the show than I would maybe the other Asian on the show. So that's just something like I want, production to understand. It's like when we say we want more representation, right? Like I don't just mean like one Asian on the show. Like it's it's so hard for that person, as we've seen over and over again. Like if they don't win vetoes,
Mhm.
they're kind of screwed. So that's just something, it like I'm both anding it. Like
Yeah.
we need more black people on the show, period. And we need more, people of color on the show, period.
Yeah, and I think people will get that from you, and I laughed, like, hearing what you're saying about, like, "No, I'm not saying there needs to be less black people," because if anyone hears that from Sasha or wants to at Sasha, at me too, and we'll probably
Listen,
both
after
block you and
Survivor
protect our
Thailand, we
peace.
know the trolls and I.
Oh gosh.
I'm
Wait,
not the one. Let me just tell you.
hopefully they've been have the people been mostly good to you?
Yeah, that's
Okay,
another
good.
thing. I don't ever, again, because I don't think I'm popular enough. So like that. So I'm grateful because like I think because I get on a few
Same.
podcasts here and there. No, you please, you're
Well, no,
popular.
it's literally like one day there's a point that I think that you get to where you're just gonna get hate,
Yeah.
just because you have so many people who are watching and who feel like they could say something about you. The beauty of like I'm so fascinated to like hear about your experience with not with the trolls. Like I've
Mm-hmm.
interviewed people and spent a lot of time talking about trolls and like
Yeah.
that, but like it's good to hear how people are good to you. So you're saying like you don't feel like you've been super exposed on the podcast, so you haven't gotten that. But like the people have been good to you
Yeah.
is where I
Yeah.
started this.
I mean, like, obviously, I get a few trolls and I'm
Yeah,
annoying. So I, like, sometimes respond, which is horrible. But, like, I will drag. I don't
you
care.
deserve to. Just like your mom drags you. You
Exactly. Exactly. Like I was born this way, right?
yeah
So I have no problem dragging people, especially if I think I'm right. Oh, it's really bad for you. Like I
yeah
got the time.
yeah.
So yeah, that's why like Shannon Gus has been one person that's really like I'm grateful. She like sometimes will message me, and like just give me tips on how to deal with
Oh
trolls, or if you're on a podcast and like you don't end up talking that much, whatever. Like she has been so kind. She'll always reach out to me. And then Puya and Kirsten have been really great with like how to navigate that stuff. And of course Rob too. I one time Rob texted me and was like, I saw this tweet about like you're fine. Don't even worry. And I was like, Rob, please.
yeah.
So I'm grateful that one, I think if I have trolls, that mean I've made it. So I don't think I've made it yet,
You made
because
it a long time
people
ago.
are nice to me still.
You made it a long time ago, even beyond RHAP. You're a
Oh
big
my god.
deal. You're famous. You were on reality
Oh
TV.
god.
You're one of the originals in reality TV. You're one of the
On it in the
trailblazers
early
in the
2000s. When
early
was I in the
days.
6th grade? Whatever that was.
You
Whatever year.
changed the game. Like honestly, you should have a Wikipedia page by now based on just that alone. But you've done
Oh
so
my
much more.
god.
But actually, I like following up on what you were saying. You mentioned Asian representation and Kevin McLean, who you did the podcast with, and Kevin's someone who as uh who I've talked with a lot about this and like a lot of topics, and he was in DC, so like we've hung out and everything. And I'm kind of curious about like your thoughts on this idea of maybe this is like a good thing for us to kind of as we get toward the end, like your thoughts on when you show up and like educate, and your thoughts on when you step back and like protect your peace and say like these people need to put in the effort. And like I'm curious how you balance those two things, because like sometimes we really feel like we have like this role to play to speak up and to say something and to educate, and other times it's like this is not worth my time and energy. And so I'm like curious, how do you balance those things? It's not only in podcasting, but also just in your work, because you could probably spend like 24 hours a day, 7 days a week educating people if you wanted to. But like, yeah, what's that balance?
Um yeah, great question. I think that the biggest thing for me is just I think Mari also said this, right? Like we know who's on the other side. Like are they listening to us? And I
Mhm.
really echo that sentiment because I have a master's in human relations, which is literally how humans interact with each other. So I something about myself. I'm pretty judgy human being. Like anyone that's close to me, will know that like I'm pretty. No, I'm quick to judge people, but I'm like the vibes. Like I'm a Cancer. I don't know if it comes from that, but like I'm pretty like on point with how I feel about people. Like I've noticed that if I'm like, hey, Matt has like a really great vibe, I know I'm gonna like rock with him, or like if blank person and I just won't get along. And then later on, it's
Mhm.
like people will come to me like months later, even being like, oh my God, Sasha, like I actually, yeah, don't like this person. So I don't know. I've always had that kind of innate ability, I think, to like see through the BS, right? Like who's genuine, who isn't. So I've realized that in like in just life, I think, and when I'm on a podcast, right? Like I'm usually on the Big Brother and 90 Day Fiance one. So in those moments, I do feel like I need to educate a little bit, right? Where I do need to, I think, say my piece is how I feel. So
Yeah.
if something happens, I always write it down. Like I'll always write down like what I feel like I need to, like the points I need to cover about Asians, or whatever, about like
Yeah.
if I'm the only person of color on the panel, right? Like whatever. I'll like write 2 or 3 points, and then I don't like to go super deep into that because I don't want to one be fighting with the chat or with
Yeah.
fighting with trolls. Like that's not the reason, but because I've studied this. I have a degree in like literally social justice and psychology, right, all into one, where I know like here's things I need to like point out, but then I also need to move on because like you not paying me to do this, right? Like, if you pay me, I will educate you, like
Yeah.
put me on your roster. I don't care. But that's something that's how I protect my peace, is like, am I getting paid? To like constantly go back and forth in education. Like, I think it's okay to like educate someone when it's like a 1-2, right? Like, oh, here's like a few points, here are a few articles. Live your best life. As opposed to when someone is like really coming at you with their like stupidity, where I was like,
Yeah.
you not paying me for this. Why am I arguing? Like, no, goodbye. So
No.
that's how I think I see it, where I have like a threshold of like this, and your sincerity, I think, because I've been in situations where some white people genuinely like had just like no idea and like
Yeah.
truly came from like a good place, did not say the right things, it doesn't matter, but like meant it in a good way. So like I'm happy to then like smile and educate them, but I'll always end with like, but don't ask someone else that, or like here,
Yeah.
or I'll always be like, you didn't do this, wink. But I hate when people ask me how I speak English so well,
Mhm.
even though they kind of low-key did. So that's how I've like
Yeah.
just through mentorship, through a lot of work, like figured out how to like call people out and call people in as necessary.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful, and it's like a good balance, and you have to kind of know when to put your energy there, and
Mhm.
know when it's like, okay, I'm not on the clock right now, and it could be a full-time job to educate people
Yeah.
about many things, and so it's good to hear that. Um, you know, before I get to, well, let me just go to the question,
Mhm.
and if you need a second to think about it, you could take that second, but one question that I've asked every interviewee at the end of these interviews is, if your life were a book or documentary, what would the title be and why? And you know what? You're ready. You look like you're ready. You look like you have this figured out. You're like, good. I have my bullet points listed out. I have my title. I wrote up the book cover, everything. What's,
Listen, one thing
yeah,
is I will never show up unprepared
I love it.
if I know that it's like a reoccurring thing. So I definitely thought about it. I'll say that because I was like, I don't want to get caught looking dumb. That's like my worst fear. I hate being embarrassed. Like I hate it. I
Oh
hate it.
no,
I hate it.
I will always like cover up for people. Even if
No,
I could have
you
gone
are
on a rant
great.
for a minute just to give you time to think about it. But clearly you've
Exactly.
thought about this.
Yeah, I was like, "Oh, maybe something will come up while we're podcasting," but, like, I don't know. So, yeah, I think mine would be just like Sasha Joseph living a life full size, because I always joke that I'm fun size, so, yeah.
Well, I'm okay. Well, let me ask you a follow-up question to catch you off guard. If it were, let's assume it's a book. Like,
Mhm.
would Sasha Joseph living life full size? Who would write like the foreword of the book
Oh
in
my
your
god.
life?
Oh,
Bam.
I think my mom would
Okay.
write
Yeah.
it, just because That's my ride or die. We've been through so much.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, or a men, like, or someone that I really respect, like, professionally. Yeah, it would have to be my mom or like someone I respect professionally, like my current boss, who like seen me through a few years now. So yeah, I think someone that like understands that like I'm funny and I want you to like cover that, and
Hmm.
also, like talk about my accomplishments too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's awesome. It's been awesome talking with you. We could probably be probably we could just be here for
I
we could be
know.
here forever. We could keep going, but I want to give you the opportunity kind of as we close out. Is there anyone that you want to I'm going to keep this open-ended. Is there anyone that you want to either drag or the opposite of drag as we close this out? They're just like, is there anyone you want to drag, or what's the opposite of drag? Like celebrate,
Yeah, lift
uplift,
up.
elevate, all of the things.
Yeah.
I think you said a great like drag or some other word that sounded good earlier, but
Oh, I
I
have no
forgot. So
idea. Maybe that should be my
drag
that
or
should
don't drag or no drag. It's like deal or
yeah,
no deal.
or like or like Sasha Joseph, I love mess. No, I'm just kidding. Um
That's the backup. That's your second book, maybe.
yeah, that's cuz if the first one sells a lot, then we'll
But
do.
oh my god, but yeah, I just want to give you the space
Yeah,
to actually more broadly, like not even about dragging. I mean, you could drag whoever or
I'm not
elevate
gonna
who or
drag
lift up
anyone.
whoever, but more broadly, I just want to give you the space to like share any advice or words with whoever's listening, kind of as we start to wrap up or wrap up. I just
Oh,
thought of that one myself.
yeah, totally. When I want to say thank you, first, and you are the first person I think I would like to lift up, because Mike Bloom, I think specifically talks a lot about you in that way, where you're just such a good interviewer, and
Oh
how,
yeah,
good you are at creating this sacred space. But I also just want to lift up, right? Secondly, like Rob, and again, like I know you and Mari also said this, like, we don't want to constantly sit here and do this, but like, I really do feel so grateful because I had zero, like zero practice on podcasting, right? Like, I just kind of showed up to be myself. And Rob, and I
um,
say Rob, but I mean like Rob as the entity also, because there's multiple people that we don't see, that are also doing the work. So, I'm so grateful for that, and for them to create this space for us, because I know there's so much like frustration and so much like flack they get for us, right? And like us
yeah,
bringing our full selves to this space, but here we are still. Suck it. No, I'm just kidding. But but I'm so grateful for this sacred space,
yeah,
and third, I think, yeah, the people, right, that we have met through this journey. I think it's different people for different ones, and I don't want to name everyone because I know I'll forget someone and that'll be horrible and disrespectful. But I just want to say, like, for people from class of 2020 that I talked to, and the quote unquote, they're not older age wise. I just mean like the people that have been
right,
doing this for a long time. Like, I just want to say how, I want to lift them up because they didn't need to share the space
yeah,
with us. They don't need to share um anything with us, but the fact that they're so willing to like open arms and really like allow us to be us, and authentically us, where and not feel so stressful. Like, I know that when I'm irritated about certain things, like I can reach for certain people, because people in my real life aren't going to understand, right? Like
hmm,
what it is to get a troll or this like reality TV drama. So again, I'm grateful for that. And those podcasters, like, who you are,
yeah,
for being that space and being this like sacred community. And lastly, for the listeners, because
yeah.
like what a chance they're taking. Like, you don't need to listen to me. Like, there's I owe you nothing, you owe me nothing, but you take a chance and you believe in the product so much, And I don't know that they're shouted out in this way in a lot of times where I think we're like, oh, we have the best listeners, they create great community. But I also just want to say like the resilience of this community and just, and I know music like, and just the joy that they are able to bring to all of this and to all of us so that we can keep doing this and the yeah, like I think that's like what I want to lift up in these spaces because it does get deep, it does get messy, it does
Yeah.
get confusing and hard. And a lot of times where a lot of people are like, well, I just didn't know about blank thing. I didn't know this thing existed. So shout out to you who are willing to learn because of us, and who are willing to like be an ally, so that we especially the people of color, don't have to do the work.
Yeah.
And there's so many, like I want to name white listeners that call, call in or call out like dirt that happens to
Yeah.
us. So
Yeah.
I want to name that too. Like I don't always want to, talk about the haters, because I want to lift
Thank
up
you.
like the allies that are out here doing the work. Even if you have like 10 followers and you don't think we see, you're defending us like we do.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's just what I want to lift up.
Wow. I love, well, one, like plus one, plus one, plus one, plus one to all of that. Seriously. And maybe and I get what you, and first of all, I just think it's ironic that we started talking out with mess and you have like the cleanest, like, exit to the podcast. Like,
Wait,
I'm not going to
really?
name names. I'm not going to name names because I'm not saying in comparison to anyone else. I'm just saying in general, like the fact that you're just like, I'm not going to name names, but I appreciate all these people. And you thanked everybody. Big thanks. Like, obviously, I think it's important that we give that thanks, like to, in all seriousness, like I'm sure I know Rob appreciates it too. And I don't think anyone could hear it enough how important they are, but the listeners especially stand out to me. Well, actually, everyone stands out to me, but
No, but
like the
I know what you mean.
anyone who's
Yeah.
listening right now, I mean, especially stands out to
Mhm.
me. So podcasters, Rob, whoever it might be, listeners who just listen, because like you don't need to be this far into this podcast hearing our voices. And so I legitimately like, I might not know you, but like I have so much love for you, for the
Yes.
people who are listening. And you said it better than I possibly could. So something that I've been asking people, like here and there, do you have like a sign off for this podcast?
Mm. I really should have practiced that one. That was the one thing I didn't practice. Actually, I didn't practice a thing before either, so thank God.
Okay,
Something
good.
came to me, but
You're always ready.
yeah, maybe the sign off could be, thank you. I say this on Love and Hip Hop, but I think it works here too. I'm cheating. I don't care. Fight me. But yeah, I think it's, thank you so much for being here with my friends. Make sure you share with your friends so we can switch and be friends.
Well, damn. Bye, Pod
I say this on
Friend.
Love and Hip Hop. So it's a rap lyrics. I know. I did not come up with it.
Oh.
I think it's a Biggie song, right?
I'm gonna do the Mari Bye, Pod Friends. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening to this week's episode of Pod Friends. And thank you so much, Sasha, for being part of it and sharing your story, sharing your journey, for not being afraid to take up space and to have your voice be heard, but in the process, creating space for other people. I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful for the learning I've had from you. I'm thankful that people are hearing the sound of my voice now, which means that they listened. And I would encourage anyone who really loved this episode again to leave a review, leave those 5 stars, and subscribe to the podcast. But also let us know on social media at MattScottGW, at HeyPodFriends. Let Sasha know what you think at funsize_04. Like, get in touch. Let us know what resonates. Let us know how your story connects with Sasha's. And keep an eye out because the season finale of Pod Friends, featuring the one and only Wendell Holland, is coming up next week. Special thanks to the RHAP team, to Scott St. Pierre, Rob Sesternino, Sam Moore, to Hannah Lidsky, Tricky Rice, Chelsea Lesser, and just their entire team, everyone behind the scenes. Thank you so much for making this possible. But, until next time, thanks for being a pod friend.